So, I'm Sam Connell.
And I'm Kathleen Kraus.
And we're here with another episode of Booked Solid, a podcast for young adults, new adults, and the forever young adult at heart.
This month we read Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. It's about Jane McKean, who was born 2 days before the dead started walking at Gettysburg. She's sent away to a school to learn how to basically put down the dead. So she's this expert zombie slayer. There are a lot of things that end up happening where she gets sent to this kind of town in the West. Lots of crazy things happen out there. So it's this really exciting story about zombie slaying. This mix of a real life historical fact, these fictional details, and what life is like for Jane, who is this larger than life character.
I was so intrigued because I don't know that I've heard such a unique premise, with maybe the exception of Mun-Muns, which we read in season 1. But here you have a zombie story in alternate historical fiction. You have an incredible female protagonist that I can't wait to get into that. It was such a fascinating read. A big reason why we picked this book is that Kathleen and I are co-chairs of the Connecticut Library Association Young Adult section. And on February 24th, we're really excited. We actually have Justina Ireland, who's so graciously come to do an interview and a Q&A with us and all of the librarians in our area. And very recently, Kathleen and I spoke at a roundtable at a summit of librarians from the tri-state. And that was moderated by Kimberly Poe. So Kimberly is the children and young adult consultant for the Connecticut State Library. We had a chance to talk to Kim a little bit about podcasts and how podcasts, especially in the pandemic, can really connect our libraries with their communities. Kim, do you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, hey, thanks for asking me to be a part of this. So I am the Children and Teen Librarian for Children and Teen Librarians. We provide continuing education opportunities, programming. Basically, I go out into the world, figure out what the children and teen librarians in Connecticut need to know, and find a way to get that information to them.
I call Kim on a regular basis, and she's always full of good energy. Your organization provides so much support to all of the librarians in the state. You very recently put together a tri-state summit of librarians. And what I'm really interested about is, if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about what you did. Particularly, you had a program that addressed using podcasting to reach the community.
I reached out to my co-facilitators or co-consultants who I have grown quite close to in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and told them that I wanted to do some type of large summit program, and many hands make light work, right? I asked if they would be interested in organizing something together, which we're able to do a lot easier now because so much of our world has moved to Zoom. It would be a little bit different, right, if we had to get into cars and drive to a location. Our keynote was Abdul Razak Zachariah, who's actually from West Haven, Connecticut, and wrote a book called The Night Is Yours. It just won the Connecticut Book Award. The consultants from the 3 states got together and we did a presentation, but then we were thinking, okay, like what kind of fun and unique things can we bring in? So we brought in 4 workshops, and I started to see some chatter about podcasting, but just sort of people asking about it and reaching out to their fellow librarians like, hey, what do you know? What do you know about softwares? I'm just interested in this. And then so when I sat down and started to sort of brainstorm some of the topics that we might want to include in what grew to be the Tri-State Summer Summit, I kind of remembered podcasting and thought, like, what a fantastic way to reach the community during this time, right? And not only during this time, but beyond. There can be some accessibility issues. That's why bookmobiles and things exist, because not everyone can get to your library. Even once we get the vaccine out there in greater quantities, there still might be some hesitance to go back to what was once known as normal, I say in air quotes. Podcasting was just sort of, it was just like right there, right? It was like, well, why not investigate this? We've begun to see librarians use radio to reach their public And podcasting is just one medium. I know that there's a library in Alaska that does, I believe, weekly story times over their radio. So it just, right, I know. I actually want to investigate that a bit more. So I knew of a few podcasts. I think the Book Jam was the one, and Scranton Talks I knew of. And it was, I believe, in an email exchange that you mentioned a podcast. And I was like, what? Hold on. Do you want to do this thing? Please say yes. So we had 3 podcasts. Each podcast has 2 hosts. So we had a total of 6 folks. So 3 different podcasts, 3 different missions, kind of. And you all use different platforms and things like that. So it was actually a really fantastic opportunity to provide information to these librarians and let them sort of pick and choose what works best for them. And I'm not sure if you saw, but specifically this that podcast session inspired another librarian in Connecticut who reached out on the listservs, and she wants to start a podcast based around the Nutmeg Book Award nominees and wants to sort of broadcast that out to Connecticut. So that session, specifically the podcasting one at the Tri-State Summit, has gone on to inspire others to use podcasting to reach communities.
It was a huge success on so many levels. We had lots of people tune in to listen, a lot of questions regarding how each of the podcasts you had as guests on there, how each of us started, what our formats are, what tech we need. Kathleen and I really enjoyed it. It was really nice just to touch base with other people across sort of the airwaves who are looking to do similar things to stay connected to the community in this format. I love that you bring up accessibility. It makes me happy to think that there are people, and we can track. We have listeners from across the country. I know some of our teams. I know the countries they travel to. I can see that they've listened in from as far away as Norway. This ability to connect, I think, is the great silver lining story of this 2020/2021 pandemic. So I just want to thank you, not for bringing us together, but for your tireless work towards supporting the librarians in what they do, amplifying our voices, and just really helping us make these connections. It was such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Kim is full of such great energy. She's doing such great work at the Connecticut State Library, and she really does a lot of library development, and she creates a lot of great programming to help libraries and librarians be the best they can be. Anyway, so before we dive into the book, I'm going to be really good about remembering the spoiler alert warning this time. Sometimes we spoil before we warn. So, new year, new resolution. If you have not had a chance to read Dread Nation, this is a really good time to hit pause, because Kathleen and I are going to pick apart everything down to the crazy reveals at the end. So Kathleen, what did you think of the book?
So I really liked it, and I think it was just what I needed right now, with something kind of fun. It's very thoughtful, but I think it's also just you get kind of, wrapped up in that adventure. And in February, and it's cold, and you're just kind of miserable. I don't know. I'm not a winter person. I just really liked being brought along on this adventure. I loved Jane. I loved Catherine, who was a character that I didn't expect to love at the beginning. Your expectations get kind of shifted, and it was just so much fun, and I have so much that I want to talk about it with you. But first of all, I want to know what you thought.
This is not a book that I would have picked for myself. As much as the premise is intriguing and unique, I'm not into zombies. I'm not into alternate histories. I'm not into violence. When I read about this book, I was like, I applaud the imagination going on here, but I can't imagine I'm going to enjoy this. Well, I really surprised myself. It was so, I hate to say this word, cerebral. It made me think. It made me consider the world we lived in. It was almost satirical, but I think it elevated itself above satire because it pulled from actual events in history to challenge things that are happening now. Can we talk about Jane McKean, who is just, it's a first person narrative. Her voice, just stoic, cynical. She's so rogue and renegade. She does her own thing. She's pragmatic. I was crazy for this character.
Now, did you read the book or did you listen to it?
I read it. What did you do?
So I listened to it. So it's narrated by Bonnie Turpin, who does a lot of YA books. So if you listen to YA audiobooks, you may have heard her before. She does such an amazing job. And I mean, she really brings Jane to life. So it's interesting for you to say that she comes alive so much on the page, because just listening to her, listening to Bonnie narrate it, it's just like Jane is talking to you.
It's my turn to share a quote. And I couldn't find a way to capture, because it's done throughout the book. Justina Ireland does this incredible job of writing in this authentic Southern Black female voice. It's so easy to get that wrong. And she does that so well that when I was looking to share a quote, I was thinking, and I didn't actually know about that narrator. So I'm so excited to hear about that voice artist. I might even go back and listen to it. But I was wondering, like, how can I really share with our listeners just how well written the main character's voice is. So I was briefly considering playing a clip of the audiobook, but I just didn't have the time to do that and to go through and listen. But what did you think? I mean, Justina Ireland she created such a powerful central character that this whole book for me was about Jane McKean. I am wild for Jane McKean. I have quite a bomb to drop on you.
Oh, I'm worried.
Now, you know how I feel about sequels
Yeah.
and trilogies. I am a huge standalone book person. Guess what I did when I finished this book?
You read the sequel?
Immediately, I'm halfway through it. I immediately needed to know and kudos to Justina Ireland. I never want to go more. I want to be in and out. I wanted to, well, we're going to spoil it when we get there about what happens, but that's very unlike me, that I wanted to stay with this character and keep going.
I definitely get that though, because I mean, when the story ends, this is one of the few times where I'm like, I absolutely must know what happens to them. And I was holding off just because I was thinking that I would totally spoil it if I read it before recording this podcast. Yeah, so we should point out that there is a sequel, Deathless Divide. And it's a duology, so those are the only two books. So Sam, you're off the hook. Only two.
I'll start small.
Baby steps. This is big for you.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, I mean, what did you think? We talked a little bit about satire in Months, and you can argue that this is kind of satire with the zombies and everything. But what Justina Ireland does that I think is powerful is that, so Jane McKean, she deals with this alternate end of the Civil War, the death rise up, and suddenly rather than dealing with the fallout of the end of the Civil War, they're fighting for their lives and they're fighting against extinction because of zombies. So she's extraordinarily powerful. She's a capable fighter. She's astute. She can see danger happening before most people around her. She's quite the warrior archetype, which I love. But then there's all these themes of racial tensions and these survivalists, which are the black people in the community who I think the term is knowing their place and following along with the natural order, that the whites are superior. And you overlay that on top of what's happening in the news and what's happening in our nation. And then you have this whole scene where a professor uses a black person to test out a vaccine in front of an audience, and that goes absolutely catastrophically wrong. But that also gets overlaid on what we're dealing with in the pandemic. So I was just curious about, what did you think of this alternate satire? It's like real tire, not satire. It's real historical things that Justina Ireland is sliding in front of our attention, and she's saying, let's talk about these issues. And I don't have to actually make this about fairies or zombies or aliens. I can she, like Louis Pasteur, they mention in the vaccine, they mention the end note where she writes about Miss Preston's School of Combat is actually based on what they did to Native Americans and her experience with that first, and then, when she first was aware of it, and then later when she was in grad school. What did you think of this kind of strange political commentary?
So, yeah, I think one of the things that I really like is I'm not necessarily a historical fiction reader. I don't read a lot of that. And even fantasy, I think the way that there's a balance between these two things, zombie stories, maybe not always my thing, but balanced with the history. And this is probably the most research I've ever done for this podcast because we are going to be speaking with her. I read a lot of interviews with her and seeing how she has this background in history. Historical research is something that she takes very seriously. So I thought all of that she brought into this story, it was really expertly done because she does it in a way where it feels entertaining and it feels, it doesn't feel like taking your medicine of I'm learning something, I'm reading a history textbook. It feels like I'm reading this adventure story, but I'm learning so much almost incidentally. So yeah, that end note was really fascinating with the inspiration for that. I think she is really looking at so many real life examples of what was going on at the time and sort of these. So the zombies in the story, I think they're really functioning as this excuse for what was really going on in terms of, the pseudoscience where you might be saying someone is racially inferior because of, X, Y, and Z, which they're saying is scientifically based in some sort of fact, but it's not. They're using that as a justification for sexism. They're using a lot of arguments for why Jane, for example, should be sent to this school to learn combat, to protect basically their attendance for white women. So I just thought that was all really fascinating because even though, the particulars of the zombies are obviously not true, the reasoning is absolutely spot on in that's what would happen, I think, if there were zombies. Like her alternate reality, her world building, I just think it's so grounded in what I do believe would really happen.
What I really loved about this book, I think this book rose above both entertainment and a book that makes you think. It came together and it was truly excellent because it does that so well. I really feel that she's an observer of human nature. And so even if it's zombie fighting, you connect with the characters. Let's talk a little bit about the characters. What a wonderful collection of amazing people, from, was it Aunt Aggie to Redfern, who is the Native American. And I love that Jane is fascinated by this. Let's start with Jane. Let's stay with Jane for just a little bit longer. I love that she's this incredible feminist character, and yet she has this very strange relationship with Catherine that she insists upon calling Kate because Kate hates that. And they strike up this friendship. They grow to depend on each other. They grow to care for each other. I have to be honest, when I was reading the book, I couldn't tell if she was attracted to Kate or if she was attracted to Jackson or Gideon. And I love that. She was just so honest and in her moment. She had this wonderful friendship out of necessity with Kate. She was so in touch with her feelings. And I think this goes back to saying, like, I buy into this zombie response. She did such a great job of characterizing Jane's frustration with Kate. Because, while they're in Baltimore, Jane hates Kate. And she's not great about it. Jane's like, well, because she's so pretty, that's reason enough to hate her, right? Like, we're all there. You can just relate. She's honest. She's not, she has a lot of flaws. She's from the hip. She's a rebel. She is unapologetic about her feelings, but she's also inward gazing and trying to figure out her feelings about different characters, about her mother, about her own history, her identity. I loved that part of this book.
I think she's very complex in a way that we don't always get to see maybe in YA books or in female characters. I think there's sometimes a little resistance to letting a character be this bold and this, Well, so one of the revelations at the end, right, is that she's kind of an unrepentant murderer, and that floored me as this revelation, but also it does feel, I guess, consistent with the character. One of the quotes that I found from Justina Ireland that I thought was really great is she said that she basically wants to create this character who is a Black girl living her best life and thriving in the 1800s. And she's given the space here to have these adventures that are typically reserved for more of like these white male type characters. So just the idea that she does have obviously some limitations of the time, and I don't think that the story, goes so far outside of what could feasibly happen, but it does allow her at the same time to sort of be this character who can push back against injustice and who can really have this big, bold personality that other people don't necessarily know what to do with, but I think it's magnetic even to the other characters.
And we didn't really talk about the whole role of race for Jane as her identity and how they bridge that separation between Jane and Kate, and how Kate struggles with her history and all the things that were thrust upon her. Through most of the book, Jane actually is deeply resentful of Kate's beauty, and it turns out that Kate is deeply resentful of her own beauty. There's a lot of symbolic things. Jane and Kate are always arguing because Kate's wearing a corset. There's this whole concept of beauty, actual weapons, whether it's a sickle, and I love how Jane's always like cranky about hers are rusty and not as effective because she's so pragmatic. And then there's Kate's weapons, which are her beauty, her ability to attract a man and distract him and manipulate. So after things go very poorly in Baltimore, Kate, Jackson, and Jane are sent to Summerland, which is supposed to be this utopia, but it's actually a dark place with a lot of evil characters. And Kate decides to start passing as white. It's not Kate's decision. Jane contrives to make it so.
One of the things I think is really interesting about that is that at this point, Catherine has no choice because Jane has already established this as fact. But they do have a discussion later on where Catherine is very clear about how she doesn't like it. I mean, she lives obviously in a nicer place than Jane does. She has all of these on the surface, which seem like benefits to her, but there's obviously that hidden level of she knows what these people who are treating her nicely don't know, basically, and she knows they're only treating her nicely because they think she's white. She's hearing this disparaging remarks that they're making against Jane or the other Black people at Summerland. So she has a lot of conflicting feelings about it that I thought was really interesting, because she's not just saying, like, I can see this as a tool. She kind of has this sort of morality, I guess, where she is not necessarily the person who's finding whatever is most expedient or whatever is most to her benefit. She kind of is like, I have to be noble, I guess, about things. So a lot of times where Jane is like, no, we've got to do what we have to survive, I think Catherine pushes up against that. Like, but what about this other thing? What about being true to, myself or true to my background rather than pretending?
I love the way that the book portrays Jane as living in poverty, sleeping in a room full of people, having to patrol the wall to keep the zombies, the shamblers out. And it's a rough life of hard labor. She gets whipped. She has no power. And yet, getting back to what you said, you definitely get the sense that Kate is more traumatized by her experience passing in this environment than Jane is. That actual pretending and that moral conflict she has her set of beliefs, and she's put in this situation where she's fraternizing and befriending and getting people to bring her gifts, and she has such contempt for these people that experience is very traumatizing for her. She's almost worse off than Jane.
I thought that was a very nuanced kind of description in the book, like the way that you would expect maybe Catherine has all the benefits and Jane has to kind of fight for her place but it's not really that's not the case. And I thought that was really fascinating to have just an examination of how both kind of work and how, I don't know if we talked about this yet, but with Jane, just how she has to play into stereotypes for the way she looks as well. And just, so I think there's a lot with just everyone is playing into a stereotype of how they are perceived to their benefit when they need to. But these are all just kind of survival techniques that they're kind of forced into.
And then there's so many different layers. There's those that fight within, those are rebellious, they're survivalists. And then, there's those scenes where Jane pretends that she's unintelligent as a way to manipulate somebody who has more power than she does. But I also wanted to ask you, I was a little bit heartbroken that we never actually got to see, Jane never returns to Rose Hill Plantation. So there's flashbacks to her mother, her mom who's the lady of the state. What an incredible story arc and big reveal at the end. So from the beginning, the reader is left to assume, I don't even think assume, I think it's even stated that her mother must have cheated on her father who's white. And I think if they say something like somebody who works in the field who's black, and that's why Jane looks the way she does. And they exchange these letters. In the beginning of the book, it's Jane writing to her mom, which is deliciously funny. She's witty and she's always lying about what she's doing. She's pretending that she's being this wonderfully docile person at Miss Creston's doing her best. Meanwhile, she's sneaking out and running around doing whatever she feels she needs to do. And then the whole second half at Summerland is the mom writing to Jane about what's going on in the plantation. The real bomb in the end, well, there's a series of devastating reveals. The first is how the father, Jane's father, returns to the plantation from the war and how he's abusive and how Jane actually enacts violence on him and how protective the mother is of Jane. I mean, you're sort of reading this. The mother doesn't expect the father to get back. And when that happens, at the very, very end, you realize that Jane's mother was passing and that Jane's mother was faithful to her father. And that the baby, in fact, Jane, was black, not because the mother was unfaithful, but because she had a child and it was, genetically, with her background, Jane was dark-skinned.
So I think it's really devastating at the end, and maybe not a huge surprise that Rose Hill is no more, but I had no idea that, because we have this kind of passing story with Catherine. I had no idea that it was going to come back, that this was actually part of Jane's mother's backstory. So I think, it's just really interesting. I think Jane really loves her mother. I think there's so much love between them, but it's a very complicated relationship just because she can't be raised. She can't be in that kind of, in the position in the house that she would ordinarily be in. So she's with her mother and then she has to be sent away to this school. And, it's just you want to maybe see how they actually interact in person rather than through these letters. But it gets kind of dark as it goes into their backstory with the scene where her mother almost drowns her.
That's my quote I wanted to share. Should I do it so we can pick this apart some more? I was just so, I had to take a breath after the scene. So this is a flashback that Jane is having. I'll just start it. So this is Jane speaking. When I was 5, my mama tried to drown me. She thinks I don't remember, that I was too young to recall the way she told the girls to draw her a bath and how she put me in my best dress, the white one she'd use for my christening. By that point in my life, it was too short to be decent, hitting me somewhere around my knees. But those were in the early days of the undead plague, when a trip into town could mean death by shambler, and we had to make do with what was at hand. That christening gown was the finest clothing I had. After the big, deep, clawfoot tub was filled, too full for a little girl, almost too full for a grown woman. Mama sent the girls away. Then she called me over. Janie, sweetness, can you get in the tub, please? I'd wondered why her voice sounded so strange, hoarse and broken, more like a bullfrog than my sainted mama. I climbed into the tub without hesitation, standing in the water uncertainly. The christening gown rose up and swirled around my hips, the warm water hitting me at my belly button. Janie, I need you to sit down. Mama's voice was stern, but still there was a quaver of uncertainty there. But Mama, it's too deep. Nonsense. It's just the right amount of water. Go ahead and sit down, sweetling. I hesitated, sinking down into a crouch. Mama had done the rest, lunging toward me and pushing me down, water sloshing all over the fine floor as I went under.
That is so rough.
Yeah. So what happens is Aunt Aggie runs in and there's an altercation and she's saved. Also, her birth date was also dark. And I struggled as a reader with this, that the mother clearly loves Jane. And here we are at the death throes of the Civil War, and the mother is fighting to love her birth child, knowing that it can't be in her situation. So they end up killing the father, or at least he turned him into a zombie. That whole relationship that was just fascinating, powerful, dark. I don't know that I've ever had such a sense of a mother's love and such a terror of a mother's love at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe it does make a little more sense at the end where you kind of see the real vulnerability of her mother, in that she has this enormous secret that has, there are people who I think kind of look at Jane and say, well, she looks like her mother, and she always has that threat of exposure, but she's living this life where she has to be white. And then at the end, she does lose that. She marries the wrong person, I guess, essentially. And then she is exposed and then has to move there. She's in California, and I guess the hope is, and I haven't read the sequel yet, that Jane has the potential to reunite with her in California if she can find her.
I think that's what's remarkable. Like, that is her goal at the end. She's not trying to get back to the plantation. Her idea of home is her mother, and she's going to go and travel to California, given what it was almost an umbilical epistolary novel, like the way they just connected across every reason. It's like unrequited mother-daughter love. It just couldn't happen in this time, in this place, with who they were. And I thought that was really powerful. I love that about the book.
Yeah, that did really stick with me too. Like, it's a nice framing device, but you really feel that bond very strongly.
I loved it. I just thought it was just full of great characters. I was entertained. I don't like the violence. I didn't love the violence. I kind of looked away sometimes. When she would brag about how smoothly the knife sliced through the shambler's throat. I was like, oh. And then there's baby zombies, little kid zombies, and half-eaten people. I couldn't believe, given that environment, which I don't like, how much I enjoyed the voice, the characters. Extremely thought-provoking.
It's a harsh world, especially reading it now, though. Just the way that, we talk about viruses and vaccines and the way that the pandemic has changed the world. And I'm just seeing that in this world. And it's just, it's funny how prescient that can feel, and how much I can just see the behavior of these people, these fictional characters from the 1800s, with, a zombie outbreak that never happened. But all of this stuff, I find reflections of that in everyday things that are happening now. So just from that perspective, I was just blown away by how close to home that it hit.
There's so much conversation in our country right now about systemic racism, and to read about this, and it's entertaining. It's a great page turner. There's so much going on, and there's great sort of scenery shifts as you go from Baltimore to Summerland. The way the story is anchored in almost the origins of social and racial discord in this country, which are real as we're dealing with zombies and a magical necklace that warns her when she's in trouble. Like, we have all of these elements, and yet we have, like you said, a very well researched historical approach to today's problems.
So it's really the perfect book to read now.
I do. I agree. Like, I think my alarm wakes me with the weather report, and it said with the wind chill, the temperature is 3 degrees. And so if that's happening anywhere near you, I strongly recommend an alternate war, history, zombie, apocalypse, racial, fictional novel to make you think about vaccines and systemic racism. Let's go. Who's not on board with that? So do you have some read-alikes for us?
I do. So the first book that this really made me think of is The Diviners by Libba Bray. And so I guess maybe I am a bigger fan of historical supernatural stories than I realized, because I was just thinking what I love about this book is kind of the similar things where it's very well researched. It's set in 1926. It's based in a lot of historical fact. It's also about these characters, the diviners, who all have these supernatural abilities. It's just really amazing, though, the way it's a 4-book series. So I know that you'll never read all 4, but at least start with the first book. And all of these characters that make up the diviners are they don't fit that mold. So it's all about pushing against this idea of America to like a very limited number of people. This, which I like about Dread Nation too, is like the American dream. Like, who is that for? And really, pushing against that, like, these characters are kind of asserting their position in the world as well, and kind of have to fight for their position in the world. And then there's just ghosts and stuff. So it's the adventure story too. So kind of very, very similar with both a lot of social commentary and then a lot of, horror elements. You had a book as well.
Yes. So The Diviners, that's YA, and Kathleen and I are really trying to ride that crossover skinny little line. But I wanted to recommend an adult novel. It's called The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. It's fairly recent. It came out in June of 2020. It's gotten a lot of buzz. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's made a lot of very top lists. It's about twin sisters, and when they're 16, they grow up in this very strange Southern Black community where everyone is a little bit, sort of mixed. So it seems like a diverse community because there's very light-skinned and dark-skinned people. But one of the sisters runs away to start passing as fully a white person, and the other one sort of stays in the Black community. It jumps from decade to decade, and it spans their mother, their lives, and then their children's lives, and their daughters. And so it's really well written. It explores a lot of the topics about race. It's a great book that explores all of these themes that we talk about.
So I have one last reco. I wanted to recommend Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is either the best or the worst kind of book to read in a pandemic. So it's about these girls who are at this school on this isolated island. They have this virus spreading called the tox, which it's sort of like a body horror novel where all sorts of crazy things happen to their bodies, basically, and they're kind of navigating that. But they've also been cut off from the outside world. Their food is getting cut off. People are dying left and right, and there are no answers. This group of girls, they decide they're going to team up. They're going to go out kind of past the gates and figure out what's going on. And it's really harrowing. I mean, it's definitely a horror type novel. This friendship between the characters is a little similar to Jane and Catherine's, and just that, that will to survive. It's very exciting. So, if you like survival type things, zombie adjacent, that's a good one to pick up.
Is that a thing? Is zombie adjacent a thing?
Sometimes you have a zombie, but it's not quite a zombie or something.
Okay. I'm down with it. Okay. So what are we reading next? So in March, Our town, New Canaan, is celebrating one author, New Canaan. We are absolutely overjoyed that this year we're not highlighting one book, we're highlighting Jacqueline Woodson. And that's mostly because she is so extraordinarily talented and prolific that we have just so many award-winning books, from children's picture books, middle grade books, fiction, books in verse, young adult novels, and adult books. Jacqueline Woodson writes so beautifully. So next month, we're going to read Another Brooklyn, which is an adult novel, but it has a lot of crossover appeal because the book is about a woman named August, and she's returned to her hometown because her father has passed. And then she flashes back to Brooklyn in 1973 when she used to run around with her closest girlfriends. The flashbacks are insightful. It's very nostalgic. It's very tender, coming of age. Many of them have missing, absent parents or have to deal with some level of trauma that's enacted on them. And it's basically a tight group of girlfriends that manages to survive and struggles to thrive in Brooklyn in 1973. And I know this sounds really dark and depressing, but it's achingly beautiful. So I encourage you to pick that up. Kathleen and I will fully spoil, pick it apart, maybe make each other cry. I can't wait.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.